Let's talk about portraits. Now, portraits are extremely awesome, and it's usually a lot of times when you're watching wedding films, you're like, oh, that shot looks so cool, and it's those shots where the bride and groom are like drooling over, and that actually makes them fall in love with your work, and so there's a lot that goes into nailing portraits, but they're also super stressful because there's that burden of, oh my goodness, I gotta make them super cinematic and artistic, and this is what the couple's gonna love the most, I can't screw this up, and I have to pose them, and I gotta find good lighting, and then the photographer also wants to get shots, and I only have 10 minutes, and when you're first starting, you could feel like you're just paralyzed and you come away being like, I didn't get anything. But the good thing is there's actually a system that we've developed that you can follow to make sure that you nail portraits every single time. And when you nail them, they're one of the best things to shoot, and they're really, really artistic, and you're going to have a lot of fun shooting them. So it's really worth the extra effort to learn how to do these well because you will not regret it. So one of the most important things with portraits is actually not shooting the portraits. It's the work that you do beforehand. You want to have a game plan, because I will guarantee you that if you just come into the day of and being like, okay, I know posing and portraits are really, really important, and I'm going to nail it and it's going to be amazing, but you don't have a plan, more than likely you're going to be very stressed out. You may even get paralyzed because something happened that you weren't expecting, like you only having 5 minutes and now you're freaking out, or the photographer's just a pain in the butt, or they're a certain way that doesn't allow you to get the amazingness in your mind translated into the film. And so the most important thing with portraits is to have a game plan before the wedding. And the way it works is like this. So before the wedding, have 3 to 4 go-to poses that you know are going to work extremely well. Have them memorized. And the best way to find poses is actually go to your favorite photographer's Instagram account or favorite photographer's blog, because let me tell you, photographers have the posing game nailed down. Like, what you'll notice is part of what makes a really good photograph is, yeah, the colors and the composition, but even more than that is the emotion behind that. And you create the emotion with really, really good posing. And so go to your favorite photographer's Instagram page and pick 3 to 4 poses that you're just like, oh man, that really fits my style. Take a screenshot of those and create an album on your phone that has like wedding poses, and memorize those poses. And it's really helpful to look at these poses the morning of, the night before, and even right before you do portraits to jog your memory of the poses that you want to do. And by establishing that game plan beforehand of which poses you're going to do with the couple this weekend, you're not thinking about that as you're with them. You're able to actually make them feel comfortable, and you're able to, joke around with them because you're not stressing out about, oh my gosh, which pose am I going to use? I don't know. And when you're planning out the poses and planning out your portraits, make sure you take into account, how tall the groom is and how short the bride is, because this makes a difference. So if you know the groom is really tall and the bride is really short, look for poses that have a tall groom and a short bride. Or if it's a tall bride and a short groom, look for poses that have that circumstance. So that way you get to the day and you just know the poses that you've planned out will work. And another helpful thing when you're game planning the day before for portraits is to practice how you're going to direct the bride and groom into these poses. Because a lot of time you're like, oh, this pose or this portrait looks so cool. And when you get to the wedding day, you're trying to like get the bride and groom to do it, and it's not working, it's awkward, they're not understanding your direction, and you just kind of clam up. So what you want to do is actually write down, okay, if the bride and groom are standing here, this is what I'm going to tell them. I'm going to tell her to put her arm exactly here. I'm going to tell him to look this way, and I'm going to tell them to make a V shape and look in opposite directions or something like that. So literally have a sequence of exactly what you're going to say, so that way you can just nail it and they know exactly what you're going for. Another helpful thing is if you're having problems getting them in that certain pose on the day of, is to, show them the actual picture so they can get an idea of what you're going for. So really, really helpful to plan that out as well the day before. So that's everything in terms of game planning. And it's really important to have, in that first time where you take the pictures from the photographer's website and you're kind of getting your go-to poses, make these your go-to poses for multiple weddings so you learn how to do them well. And that way, when you have 3 or 4 poses that always work, then you can always use those. And our recommendation is to have 3 or 4 that you know are going to work, and then have a 5th one every wedding that's more creative, that's different, that's one that you've never tried before. And, if it doesn't work, that's totally fine, because you have the 3 or 4 that are solid and are golden. But if that 5th one works, then you're like, oh man, you can add another pose into your repertoire. And it's just a really solid way not to get stressed out with trying a whole new thing, a whole new set of poses every wedding. And that, again, alleviates stress and makes sure that the portraits will go phenomenally. So one of the scariest things that people tell us all the time is working with a photographer during this portrait session, because it could very well turn into an all-out war, which is what you don't want, because the photographer is like, I have a set amount of time to get these certain pictures. And so put yourself in the photographer's mind. Like, these photos that they take are the ones that the bride and groom are going to want to hang on their wall. So the photographer is under a lot of stress. And so oftentimes what could end up happening is the photographer is like, get out of my way, like, I need to get my shots. And then you're like, oh my gosh, but I need to get my shots. And then you guys just end up kind of like shooting over each other's shoulders, constantly getting in each other's shots, and it's just not good. So here's a couple of tips for working with the photographer. First, before the wedding even starts, make sure that you send them a text message and look at their work. Go on Instagram, follow them on Instagram, like their pictures, and comment on one of their photos. We do this every single wedding before we actually shoot it. And then we send them a text saying, hey, we can't wait to work with you, and put in a little line of what you love about their work or their style, and let them know that if they have any questions, that they can give you a call. This massively helps, because at first glance, they see you as, oh, here's a videographer who wants to work with me, who wants to collaborate. They're not gonna, be in my way. They're really nice. They like my work. And that alone will set a solid foundation for, come portrait time, they're gonna remember that, and they're not gonna be as stiff-armed, to you just getting out of the way, don't bother me. But they're gonna be like, oh no, this is a nice guy or a nice girl. I really wanna help them. Then another thing to do is, as soon as you get to the wedding, try to get to the wedding like 30 minutes before, where you can go up to the photographer, introduce yourself, tell them, hey, can't wait to work with you, and then ask them how they're going to do various parts of the day, especially the portraits, and say, hey, I'm just going to be out of your way, and I'm going to let you do your thing, and I'm going to go in and get my shots right before we change locations with the bride and groom. So the way portraits usually work is the photographer will put them in a really amazing spot, and they'll do various poses with the bride and groom, and then they'll move them to another spot. And the best time to get your video footage is right before they move spots. So you just tell the photographer hey, we're just going to be collaborating, and right before you change spots, I'm going to go in really quick and get, 2 to 3 minutes of footage, or even less than that. And the key thing here is, when you go in and get your shots, be quick, be efficient. And like we said in the game plan, know what you're going to capture, because the photographer is under a time crunch. So if you're there just standing maybe we'll try it this way, or nah, that didn't really work, and you're looking at your phone, that can make the photographer really stressed out. You want to come in, get your shots quickly, and get out. And then there's also times where the photographer will put the bride and groom in an amazing pose, and you're like, oh my gosh, I want to get it. So what you can do really quick is, don't just run in and grab it, and the photographer is like, what the heck? Tell the photographer hey, I love that pose. Compliment them on the pose, because that will make them feel really good. And say, hey, can I just grab a quick shot of what they're doing? And more often than not, they'll say, yeah, sure. But make sure it's quick. Just get in there, get a wide shot, or get your close-up and get out. And if you say it's going to be quick and it's actually quick, the photographer will develop trust with you, and they'll really enjoy working with you. Another thing to consider when you're working with a photographer is make it really lighthearted. If you see really cool lighting, say, hey, look, this lighting looks really awesome. How about we do it over here? And make it seem like you guys are on the same team, because you are. So if the photographer recommends something that could be cool and you think it's cool, be like, yeah, that's awesome. And if you see something that's cool, tell the photographer about it. And if you help them, they're more likely to want to help you. And so really, it doesn't need to be this all-out war, and it doesn't need to be well, you get your shots and I get my shots. Really, with sending the text before and talking with them before and really making them feel important and valued will do massive things to make that portrait session a spirit of collaboration. And when it is a spirit of collaboration, you will get better video, they will get better photos, and the bride and groom will have a better experience because everyone is having a good time. And then one last tip for working with a photographer. Now, this hardly ever happens, but sometimes the photographer is an absolute jerk. And this is just so sad because what they don't realize is they're actually affecting the couple and they're affecting the couple's video and things like that. But sometimes it happens where the photographer just will not let you get your shots. And that's unfortunate, you know? But the way to handle this is you have to be assertive. But you also want to be respectful because just because the photographer is being a pain in the butt, you're not going to make it any better by also being a jerk. It's just going to make things worse. So you want to like throw kindness on them because that's going to help so much. But how that practically looks is when they're doing their poses, like again, like I mentioned, right before they switch locations, that is your time. You be assertive and you get in there and you say, okay, real quick, before we change things, I'm going to do this with the bride and groom. And maybe even don't say, I'm going to do this. Just get in and be like, hey, I'm going to grab a couple shots. And you don't wait for the photographer's permission. You just come in and start talking to the bride and groom. Because if you're assertive and you already start talking to the bride and groom, you're going to get your shots. The photographer may be like, like sitting in the corner and be like, come on, hurry up. And they just might be annoyed with you. But you know that this is for the couple. You're not doing this video for the photographer. You're doing it for them. So just be assertive and get what you need and move on. I'd say 95% of the weddings, or 99 even, you're never going to run into a photographer who's this mean that won't even let you get a shot. But when that does happen, be assertive, get in there. Do not ask the photographer's permission if you can get a shot, because more often than not, they'll say, no, like, you can't get a shot. And so you just really got to get in there. And if there's a pose that you kind of like that the photographer has done, just say, hey, can I grab that really quick? If it is a pose that they've done, you want to ask permission because that can get a little dicey. But right before they move locations, and they're done getting their things, you get in there and you get what you need. And really, I can't stress it enough. If you have a problem photographer, just be really nice to them, be really kind, do not match their rudeness, and cause them to remember, like, hey, I wasn't so keen on having a videographer there, but that person was really, really kind to me and nice. And, he got what he needed and I got what I needed. So that's a key thing if you run into a situation like that. So now we move on to directing the bride and groom. And what this means is telling the bride and groom to do things and get in certain poses. And you got to remember, the bride and groom more than likely are not professional actors or models. So they're going to be awkward. And don't let that stress you out, because oftentimes what could happen is you're trying to direct the bride and groom or put them in a pose and they look uncomfortable or awkward. That doesn't mean you're doing a bad job. Like, when you first start out, that can kind of freak you out because you're like, oh my gosh, they think I'm awkward, they're getting awkward, and they think I'm a weirdo, and they, don't think this looks cool. And that's not it at all. They're just a little uncomfortable posing. So one of the first things to do is, as you're walking to where you're going to do portraits, talk with the bride and groom, get them comfortable with you talking to them. Like, tell them how awesome their wedding was or how incredible their vows were. Really establish some rapport so they feel just comfortable talking with you. And then another thing is, when you're actually telling the bride and groom to do things, it's so easy to be looking through your camera lens, like looking at the back of your camera and talking to them. And this feels really impersonal because it's almost like they're talking to this robot because they're just looking at this camera. They can't even see your face. So before you even pull out the camera, just kind of put the camera by your side and look at them in the eye. And you can even say like, hey, I know you guys don't normally do this, but we're going to make this really fun, and tell them where you need them to be. Like, if you need them looking in a certain direction or you need their arm in a certain place, and be confident. Probably the biggest thing with posing is to be confident. And when you're directing them, if you're not confident, that's when things get awkward. So if you need the bride to place her hand on the groom's shoulder, like, don't don't feel too bad if just saying like, hey, place your hand there. Or if they're not really getting it, maybe even just move their hand there or move their arm and say, hey, is it okay if I just move your hand or kind of tilt you this way? And just be really, really confident. And then another thing is, as you're directing them, always be giving them affirmation. Because again, they're not actors or models. So the whole time they're thinking, do I look weird? Is my double chin showing? Is this my good side? Like, what's going on? And they're feeling very awkward, just not because you're making it that way, just because they don't normally do this. So whenever you're shooting or we put them in a pose and it's working, tell them like, oh man, guys, this looks incredible. Or, sometimes I'll say, do you guys do this all the time? You guys are like absolute pros at it. Or like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like, I can't wait to edit this. And just anything that you can do to affirm them, because one, it will calm their nerves, which will give you better video. And two, it'll sometimes make them smile, which is really, really cool. And you can get awesome images and moments captured. Or three, it'll just make them feel confident. And, if you're having them do a super serious pose and you're saying, you are nailing it, like, man, this looks amazing, then they're gonna like feel really cool and they'll be like, yeah, I'm nailing it. And they're just gonna have that confidence about them, which will make your images look even better. And so really, really important to compliment them. And then another tool for like directing the bride and groom is, if you need them to look a certain way and they're not quite getting it, is you can hold your fist out and have them look at your fist. So say you want the bride to look in a certain direction, you could hold your fist out at that exact spot and say, hey, look down at my fist. And it's so good because they know exactly where they're going to look, and bam, your fist is there and they're in the right place. And so this is really, really helpful. And really just the whole time you're talking with them, make it seem like they're talking with a friend. Make it fun, crack jokes, tell them how great they're doing, and never make it feel like this photo shoot. Because as soon as it starts to feel like a photo shoot or you're just barking orders at them, they might get a little awkward. So that's some of the key things with directing the bride and groom. And another really important tip, and this one is massive because I've seen it done wrong. It's when you're posing the bride and groom or you're directing them and they're doing something that you don't want them to do, or you put them in a pose and it doesn't look good. I've seen so many people say, that doesn't look good. Or, you kind of notice that they're turning their head in a certain way. You're like, oh, don't do that. Or, this isn't quite working. You use all those negative types of phrases, and this is horrible because the bride and groom, like we mentioned before, they're already not super confident about taking pictures. And if you ever use any negative terms, and it could be as simple as, nah, I don't think that's going to work, or no, I don't like that, that's going to massively affect them and they're going to feel even more awkward for pictures. So instead of, hey, I don't like that, just say, okay, cool, like that was great, let's try this other thing. All right, so now let's talk about posing. So posing can potentially be really difficult. I mean, just because there's all these things, you got to position the bride and groom in a certain way, but it doesn't have to be. I mean, really one of the best tips I have for posing is follow the photographer. And the way you know when to do this or not is before the wedding, actually look at the photographer's profile or look at her Instagram or look at her website. And if their work is the exact same style as yours and you love it, let them lead, let them put the bride and groom in whatever poses they want to put them in, and this will make your job way easier. It actually might feel like stealing because you're letting the photographer kind of set up a shot and then you're just like, hey, can I grab a quick shot? And you're like, this is too easy. It shouldn't be this easy. And that is okay, because actually when you let the photographer lead, it does a couple of things. One is it allows the photographer to feel really empowered, that you're letting them do what they need to do. You're not getting in their way. And then when you get the shots with their poses, tell them like, oh my gosh, that pose looks so cool. Like, I'm going to get a shot, which makes them feel really important and valued. And then it also allows you as a filmmaker to focus more on the movement and what the couple's doing and what you want your camera to do and telling the story, and you're not so like bombarded with, oh, what do I do for poses and things like that. And it allows you to focus more on things that could potentially matter more. So this is huge. And a lot of people don't do this because they feel like, oh, as the filmmaker, I need to be, doing all these crazy poses with the couple and I need to be the one to do them. But no, if the photographer has already the exact style of and posing that you're looking for, just let them lead. I'd say like, for us, 3 out of the 5 poses we normally do are from just stagnant poses. We don't have the couple like run around or like adventure around. Like, yeah, we will do certain shots like that, but half, if not more, of the poses we do are just standstill poses, and we kind of add movement with the camera, or we'll, add movement with the couple in that pose. So you can totally go off what the photographer's already doing. And a good amount of the time, if the photographer is amazing, we'll just literally have the couple stay in the exact same place that the photographer's positioned them, and then we'll just get a couple shots around the pose that they're already in. And this allows the couple to feel way more comfortable. They don't got to move into another pose, and it lets you actually be a lot quicker and more efficient. Because imagine if you didn't like the pose and then you had to repose the couple, and maybe the pose isn't working, the photographer's sitting there waiting like, when is this guy going to be done? And it just takes twice as long. Whereas if they were already posed, you can just go in there and do what you need, and it's way better. So as a beginner who's just starting out, just go off what the photographer's doing. And as you get more advanced and as you learn the skill of posing people, then you can start to experiment with, some poses of your own. And, this is a really powerful skill to have, because, you don't always end up in a situation where the photographer is amazing. Sometimes the photographer has a different style or type of pose that they're doing with a couple that isn't good for video. So there are going to be times when you're going to need to pose the couple, and that's why all these techniques that we're about to get into and all these systems that we're about to talk about are so important. So oftentimes when you get a bride and groom in a pose that you really love, sometimes you could get paralyzed because you're like, okay, they're in this pose and it looks awesome for a photo, but how do I make it into a good sequence that I can edit together into their film? And that could be really stressful. So what we've done at Forestry is we've developed a system to where every single pose follows this shot system. And what we do is we get 5 shots for every single pose. And the way that looks like is we get 2 close-up shots of emotion. And what I mean emotion, that's like the bride and groom's face, really getting whatever they're doing and the emotion of it. We get 2 shots of that, and they're usually close-ups. And then we get a 3rd abstract shot. And this is usually of something other than the bride and groom's faces. So it's, of the bride's bouquet, or of her hands, or of her hair as it flows through the wind, or of something that is not their face. And this really just helps give you the ability to get that cool artistic shot or that creative moment, and it looks really amazing. And then for that 4th shot, what we'll do is we'll get a medium shot of the bride and groom. So this is usually from their waist to the top of their head and a little bit more, and this is just a really great shot to kind of get a sense of scene of what's going on. And it looks really cool when you edit this shot with those close-up shots. It looks really nice. And then lastly, the last shot in this 5 to 6 shot sequence is we get a wide shot. And this is, for this wide shot, you want it to be like a pretty epic wide shot. You want to be able to see, from the bottom of the bride and groom's feet all the way to the top, and tons of negative space usually. So it would be a full body shot. And the reason we get these wide shots are the ones where, these are the really cinematic, the really cool ones. When people see them, they're like, whoa. And it's so good to get these, because oftentimes as a filmmaker, you can get so caught up in getting all the little details and the close-ups that when you go to edit, you're like, oh my gosh, I was adventuring around in the cliffs of, California, or in the woods of Oregon, but you can't even tell I'm there because all I got were really close-up shots. And that would be such a tragedy to go do this incredible travel wedding or go to one of your favorite venues and you don't even show off the venue. So really make sure that in every pose or every sequence that you get, throw in a really cool wide shot, because those will be those shots that you're like, oh man, that looks awesome. And it will really make the bride and groom happy that you got the whole atmosphere of, the place that they chose out. One thing with poses to remember is that subtlety is key. So a lot of times, I see a lot of videographers think, oh my gosh, I got to do this crazy camera move, or I got to have the couple, do this thing where it just looks super epic, and I have to have the groom throw the bride in the air, and I have to have them run through these fields, and that's the only way I can get really epic portrait shots. But that's not true. For posing, it's just all about those little moments. It's about, maybe having the bride look down and then look straight at your camera and just, stare straight, and just that little dramatic movement that could add so much weight and emotion. Or maybe it's about just having the groom kiss her on the forehead, or having them both just look off in different directions, or maybe having them canoodle up close together and, just getting them squeezing tight. And all these little things add life to the portraits. They add drama, and it's really good to actually have a little grab bag of little subtleties that you can just throw into a certain pose to add life to it. So like I mentioned, one could be, having the groom kiss the bride on the forehead. The other could be having them just canoodle and tight. Another could be having the groom whisper something into the bride's ear to make her laugh. And just that laughter, that authenticness that's happening will produce such amazing images and video. And you could even have, hey, why don't you guys just slow dance here? And maybe the scene is just so beautiful, and you've created a moment where you can actually get your close-ups, your, inanimate object shot, your wide shot, your, medium shot, where they're actually doing something, and all you got to do is kind of go through that sequence and you have something solid. So that's another idea, is just to have these grab bag tools where you can throw in a little subtlety here or there. One last thing to remember with posing the couple is be excited. Like, a lot of couples, like we talked about in the directing portion, aren't super excited about being posed. But if you're excited, they'll be excited. So whenever you see some cool light, or you're like, oh man, in your mind you're thinking, I want to try this pose, like, be excited. Say, go up to the bride and groom and tell them, okay, we're going to do this really cool thing. It's going to look really cinematic. You guys are going to look amazing. And this will get them excited, and this will get them wanting to actually be posed in a certain direction or do a certain thing. And this is key, because it'll kind of really get them at ease and really make them feel a lot more comfortable. When we first started getting portraits, we kind of almost got carried away with getting the cool cinematic shots. Like, we actually found ourselves going back into the edit and being like, oh my gosh, these shots are perfect, but they were all very dramatic and all very cinematic. And we found that, wait a minute, we didn't really capture the couple's personality, and then we kind of went on the other end of the spectrum, where we just got the couple laughing or goofing around, and then we're like, we didn't get any really cool cinematic poses or things like that. So you really want to divvy it up. So say if you have 3 or 5 or 6 poses that you want to do, kind of divide them up. So you kind of want 3 cinematic poses, and then you want 3 poses that are more showcasing the couple's personality, where you get them laughing, or you get them making goofy faces, or maybe you get them slow dancing, where it really has emotion and weight to it rather than just looking cool. So when you do that, when you plan out your poses to be effective for both the emotion and the coolness and the epicness and the trendiness of these really artsy shots, you have a really good variety, so that when you get back into your edit, if you need a certain pose where they're being more goofy, you have that. Or if you need a pose that you're going to open the film with, of them maybe really stoically looking off in separate directions, and you're pushing in with the camera and it just looks amazing, you have that as well. So try for at least 3 or 4 poses, and if you have 4, have maybe 1 or 2 have more personality, whether they be laughing or dancing or walking or doing something where they actually are, having fun, and then maybe have 1 or 2 where they're maybe just looking down or looking off in separate directions, and those are your cinematic epic poses. So that's one tip that I would give you guys on posing. And that wraps it up with posing. It really is not that difficult, and I want to really emphasize that it's okay if you fail, if you feel like it's really awkward. It is a skill. It's something that you have the opportunity to get better and better at every wedding. And one thing is, pay attention to how the photographer is posing them, because they do this all the time. They're doing engagement shoots, family shoots. Learn from them. Ask them what they love to do with posing, and really just learn to get better and better at it. And experiment, have fun. It's not the end of the world. What we found is, if we have just 3 solid, pose sequences, we are more than good. So don't necessarily put all this weight and burden on yourself that you have to have 40 minutes of incredible portraits. You only need 3 really solid sequences, and anything above that is just, gravy, is bonus. So really, I hope this is really helpful. I know it's been helpful to us, and make sure that you have a system kind of like the one we laid out, and you will nail it. Let's talk about camera movement. So you have the posing, you have directing the couple, you have prepping before the wedding, but then you have the whole aspect of camera movement. What do you do? Do you just pose the couple and just get stable shots? Do you do slider shots? Do you do gimbal shots? What kind of movement is necessary to make portraits really epic and amazing. And one of the key things, just like in posing, is subtlety. So with camera movement, a lot of times I see people whip out these massive sliders and they're getting like a 3-foot slider shot of the couple posing, or they're just getting gimbal shot and gimbal shot after gimbal shot, or they'll bring a jib and it's just like, no, it's all about the subtlety. Really, all you need is a brief little form of movement to make the image interesting. And what you also have to remember is movement isn't the end all be all in making an image interesting. Like, an image is interesting because of the composition, because of the lighting, because of the emotion coming from the bride and groom. And I can hands down tell you that if the bride is laughing, or if the bride and groom are just really doing something dramatic, or they're maybe slow dancing, that is far more interesting than any movement than you can add. So a lot of times, if they are doing something like that, just leave the camera stable and just hold it and let the moment and let the emotion speak for itself. Let the actual emotion of what's going on in the scene grab the viewer's attention. You don't need all this movement. That would actually sometimes distract from the emotion that's going on. So that's one thing to remember. But there are times when you want to add movement, and some of the best times to add movement are when the bride and groom are doing something where they are completely still. So say a pose where maybe, the groom is right behind the bride and the bride is looking down over her shoulder, just closing her eyes, and it's a really cinematic pose, but they're not necessarily talking to each other or squeezing each other tight. That is okay. Actually, what we do is we hold our monopod with the camera on top, and we use the monopod arm and we brace that against our chest, and all we do is we do subtle pan movements. So the way that would look is we might go do a close-up on the bride as she's looking down, and just as we're holding the monopod, we just ever so slightly, like it's a distance of probably like 1 inch to 3 inches, and we just slightly move the camera, and that's one shot. And then we kind of back up and get maybe a medium shot, and then we slowly pan down, and that's another shot. Or her bouquet, she's holding that as she's looking off to the side. We'll do a close-up of the bouquet and slowly move it from left to right. And it's just about these subtleties. Like, it'll evoke the emotion as if you were on a slider without you having to carry around this big slider, and it just adds that little bit of movement to really bring the audience in. And another example is, say, the bride and groom are posing and you want to get your wide shot, and maybe it's not as interesting as you'd like it to be. That's totally okay. What you can do is actually find like a bush or a tree or something like that and go behind the bush or the tree and slowly move so you can see the bride and groom through the bush or the tree. And as you move out from beside the bush, it just adds that little subtlety of movement, or maybe you pan up. So the slowness and the subtlety makes it 10 times more cinematic than something fast. And another thing to remember is when you're doing, say, a gimbal shot, which we oftentimes do is when we have the bride and groom walking towards us, say, holding hands and talking to one another. That's one of our favorite poses to do because it really gets them, being themselves and being authentic. Is we will actually move pretty slowly, and we'll have them also, we'll say, hey, like, this isn't a fast walk, it's more of a saunter. So we tell them, like, almost imagine like a drunk walk where you're just kind of, meandering through the fields and you're talking to each other. And we tell them this is to make it seem like you guys are having the most fun you've ever had walking. And they usually laugh at this, but it's cool because they start to smile really big and laugh. And we even say, like, even if it feels cheesy, it's going to look great on camera, and it always does. And so have them talking and laughing, and it's just all about those subtleties. And so really remember that when you think of movement, is to think of slow, confident, purposeful, subtle movement. So the last thing to remember with portraits is good lighting. Good lighting is massive. It can make or break your shots. I mean, it really is the key to incredible cinematic images. So before you even put the couple in a pose, you want to find a place that has good lighting. And first thing with lighting is to pick a time of day that the light looks excellent. So the best time of the day is actually near the end at 4, 5, or 6. And the reason for this is the sun is starting to set. The sun is giving off a much softer light than it gives off at noon or 1. When it's noon or 1, the sun is usually directly above. It's not diffused by any trees. It's right just blaring down on people. And what that makes the images look like is very harsh. It really brings out the wrinkles in people's faces, or it makes the shadows look really, really harsh and not soft. And that's really just not what you want for portraits. So you really want to aim to do portraits near the end of the day. And the great way to make sure this happens is have the couple send you their timeline 30 days before the wedding, where you can look over it. And if you notice their portraits aren't near the end of the day, make a suggestion and tell them, hey, if you want your photos to look just absolutely incredible and the best possible, you should do your portraits, right after the ceremony. And of course they're going to want to do that for you because they spent money on you. They're going to want to make sure that their video looks good and that they look good in it. And if for some reason you can't do portraits around that time right after the ceremony, maybe suggest to the bride and groom, like, hey, what if we did, portraits after your grand entrance, like right before, all the things start happening, like the speeches and things like that. Can we steal you away for 10 or 15 minutes to do epic sunset photos or epic sunset video? And they will have no problem with that because it'll make them look awesome. So that's a key thing to remember with lighting. And another cool thing with lighting is to really go off the photographer, because like we mentioned in the posing, they're doing a lot of the work for you. Most of the time, photographers are already going to put the bride and groom in really amazing lighting. So you can kind of just let them do their thing, and then bam, they're already in good lighting and you don't have to do anything and you just follow their lead. But in the cases where the photographer maybe doesn't have a knack for lighting, or you're like, ooh, that lighting doesn't look very good, or you maybe have the bride and groom alone, here's some things to look for lighting wise that always look really good. So the first thing, bar none, is the time of day. Once you get the time of day right, like around that 5-ish mark or 6-ish mark, you can pretty much put the bride and groom anywhere and it's going to look amazing. So here's just a couple of tips to make it look even better, or to do some creative things. So one of them is look for shafts of light. And what I'm talking about here is like, you see a tree and maybe the sun is just hitting that tree and it's creating these shafts of light that just look amazing. And you can actually see them. You can actually see the light beams. Those look gorgeous in photos and in videos. So put the couple like right by that tree and get a wide shot where you can see all that. Look, that looks amazing. And another thing to look for when you're looking for lighting is look for pockets of light, like splashes of light. Now this is a little hard. You kind of got to train your eye to see these. And what I'll do is I'll put some examples, but when you look at, say, a range of trees, and it's kind of around that dusk time where there's not really directional light coming from anywhere, you'll notice a certain section of the trees is brighter than sections around it. Or you'll be looking at a field and you'll notice that some of the tall grass is lit just a little bit brighter than the rest of the grass around it. That little nook of light is golden. That's where you want to put the couple, and you want to have them, facing that light, and that's just going to look super soft on their face. And because they're in a pocket of light around more darker areas of light, it's going to create contrast. And when you can create contrast with your images, it's going to make the couple pop all the more and just make all the shadows and the tones look really, really nice. And then kind of going off of that, another type of lighting we like to look for is cave lighting. And what that looks like is, think about if you stood right in front of a really, really dark cave during the daytime. So the cave behind you would be super dark, but because you're standing in front of it, the light from the outside is hitting your face and you're actually brighter. And what that does is it creates really awesome contrast. And like we mentioned before, contrast is one of the keys to cinematic images. And so the way that looks practically is you have the bride and groom, maybe there's a really dark forest and it's all dark, but you found that one little nook of light that I just talked about and you put them there and all the forest is kind of dark around them, but they're lit. And you kind of expose for them and it just makes it look really cool and moody and trendy, and they have really cool shadows, but they're soft, and everything else, all the shadows are falling, around them, and it just looks really, really cool. And so that's another thing to look for. And then also what you could look for is backlighting the couple. So right as the sun is setting, it gets really, really orangey, and that's when you see like kind of those shafts of light I was talking about. So find one of those shafts of light and actually put the couple in the shaft of light. And what you're going to want to do is put the couple with their heads together. And then you want to have that shaft of light backlighting them. So you're on the opposite side shooting into the shaft of light as the couple is standing right in front of the shaft of light. And what that creates is just this really, really gorgeous image where they have a nice rim of light around them. And if there's kind of dust in the air, or maybe there's, certain things where it makes the light look incredible, you're going to see all of that in the image, and it looks really, really nice. So that's another thing to look for lighting wise. And one other good tip that we like to do is, say if you can't get the bride and groom in that 5, 6, 7 o'clock window and you have to film them at noon, always look for the shade, because the shade looks way better than direct sunlight. So look for a big tree and look for the light from the sun being diffused through the tree, and put them underneath the tree. Put the bride and groom underneath the tree, and it's going to look way better than the direct sunlight. So these are just a bunch of tips that we use for lighting at every wedding. And these are things that you're going to want to practice over and over again, and really start practicing seeing good light. Like even when you're not shooting, kind of, look at how the light is hitting certain objects and what it's doing. And this will massively help you actually become better at noticing good light. And another tip is to start taking pictures on your phone. Become a photographer. Start learning how light works and look at other photographs and see, where is that light coming from? What is the main light in this photo? And that will teach you how to see light even better. So that wraps up this whole portrait session. All of these things together, when you really practice them and really refine them, they will make portraits so much easier, and you'll be able to nail them every time.